Are talking about how to bring peace to the Middle East. We have guests here in the studio to discuss this matter. We'll meet them in a moment. Core issues to be sorted out include the future status of Jerusalem, the Israeli settlements on Palestinian land, where the borders might be drawn, security for both sides, of course, as well as the right of refugees perhaps to return. Well, Tzipi Livni and Saab Erekat for the Palestinian Authority were both in Washington with the US Secretary of State John Kerry to restart the process that had been on hold for 3 years. There's a 9-month deadline being set to sort it all out. Stephen Carroll sets the scene.
After a 3-year stalemate, Israeli and Palestinian negotiators set themselves an ambitious goal in Washington on Tuesday.
The parties have agreed to remain engaged in sustained, continuous, and substantive negotiations on the core issues, and they will meet within the next 2 weeks in either Israel or the Palestinian territories.
The talks will lay out a framework for the formal negotiations expected to last 9 months. The US is urging compromise, but deep divisions remain on the key issues. Among them, the future of 5 million Palestinian refugees and the status of Jerusalem, which both sides claim as their capital. The biggest bone of contention is the future border. The Palestinians have been firm in their insistence of a return to the 1967 line.
Palestinians have suffered enough, and no one benefits more from the success of this endeavor more than Palestinians. And it's time for the Palestinian people to have an independent, sovereign state of their own.
Back in 2010, talks collapsed over Israel's continued construction of settlements in the West Bank. On Tuesday, Israel's chief negotiator acknowledged that there's still a long road ahead.
We all know that it's not going to be easy. It's going to be hard, with ups and downs. In these negotiations, it's not our intention to argue about the past, but to create solutions and make decisions for the future.
The US president met the negotiators and John Kerry on Tuesday to express his personal support for what he described as final status talks. Barack Obama said his visit to the region in March had reinforced his belief that peace was possible.
Stephen Carroll there. You, of course, can join in this debate via Twitter or social networks with the hashtag F24debate. Of course, your thoughts will go straight on air. That's my own personal account, but you can get to us via that, of course. Let's now bring you the people who are going to hopefully take this process a little bit forward and maybe, who knows, find some solutions over the next hour. Our guests for this debate are Ziad Klo, a Franco-Palestinian lawyer and a former legal advisor to the PLO. Thank you, sir, for being with us. We have Gil Mihaly, who's the columnist for the Yayot Aronot, still Israel's top-selling newspaper, sir, and the founder of Kozer.fr, or .fr if you're English. Thank you for being with us, sir. On the other side of our studio, Sari Khoury, who is the Palestinian activist and an architect by trade. So maybe you're looking to construct something out of this debate. We'll wait and see, eh? And next to him is Ron Soffer, a lawyer at the bar in Paris and in New York. And obviously a man with, well, we'll see if you're smiling by the end of the programme, sir. Thank you for joining us. Coming down the line from London, we have a voice we do always welcome here on France 24, that of Jonathan Paris. He's the Middle East analyst and senior fellow at the Atlantic Council of the United States. Jonathan, thank you for being with us. We'll bring you in a moment's time. I'm starting here in the studio with Gil Mihaly. 9 months to thrash everything out. Is there any chance of that happening?
Yes, but slim. For many reasons. I think that the changes, the profound changes brought about by the Arab Spring are far from being digested. And I don't see the geopolitical, strategical base for such an important settlement. So I'm skeptical. I do have hope. Things can happen when you do things. Things can happen, but I will be surprised.
Sari Khoury, fine words from Tzipi Livni that we heard in our report there. I mean, clearly this is a whole different way of approaching this situation. But is the problem for you basically that the Israelis haven't compromised enough and don't want to compromise?
I think in this particular round, it's more so the devil is in the detail. So like what was mentioned right now, it's really more emphasis on the changes in the regional climate. That's one important element. Another Haaretz article talked about limiting Palestinian efforts in the UN this coming September. And obviously the US is looking for a role to play in the region. It hasn't been quite effective, neither in Syria. The latest situation in Egypt has caught it by surprise. It's hard to see where this is going without really trying to make some sort of recap on 20 years of the Oslo peace negotiations. How do you move forward? What have we learned from 20 years of negotiations? Is there something of value that should be pointed out now? And obviously they put it all as negotiations in secrecy, more or less. So we're really limited to a spectator position to a significant degree.
You're talking about 20 years of negotiations. I mean,
Yes.
to get through all of this in 9 months and get it all sorted definitively, it seems very ambitious.
Sure. And what have we learned from 20 years of negotiations? I mean, can you filter it down to certain directions that we need to take as negotiators, whether Palestinian, Israeli? The American role certainly needs to be revised by the American administration. Have they learned a new way to go forward? Certainly their choice of Martin Indyk raises some questions, although there was much talk about the Palestinians not getting some compromises on the settlement question. But it's very clear that the choice of Martin Indyk as moderator, we can say, is very much a choice to calm the Israeli lobby.
Facilitator. The word compromise has come up already, which is good.
Yeah.
Ron, can I bring you in? What are your first thoughts?
Well, I think that the problem is with the fact that the Palestinians have basically obtained from the United Nations and recently from the European Union everything they wanted. And the question is, do they have an incentive to compromise? Because the European Union came out with 10 days ago with an ill-timed directive basically boycotting Israeli businesses who employ Palestinians outside what they call the 1967 borders, except that this legally charged terms, the 1967 borders, doesn't take into account that there was no border. The 1949 armistice between Israel and the warring Arab states specifically stated that the 1949 armistice lines are not borders. So there is no such thing as a 1967 borders, except that the Palestinians have already been given this by the European Union, by the United Nations a few months ago. And the question is, will they be willing to compromise on something that they have already obtained from
gets
the
incredibly
world
complicated
community?
if you're coming at this as an outsider in many ways, as I am, of course, just as a humble journalist. It is complicated, but I appreciate with every complication, there are big passions involved. Let me bring in Ziad and just ask him if he's a man who thinks the Palestinians will compromise. Ron's saying, of course, you've got nothing to compromise for. You've got everything you want.
Well, I think they've already compromised quite a lot. I'm not sure that what's left of the Palestinian leadership in Ramallah is in a position to get anything from the Israelis. I think that they don't represent the Palestinian people, generally speaking, and they don't have a mandate to negotiate. What I'm surprised by is, just to follow up on what Mr. Khouli was saying, is that after 20 years of so-called negotiation, nobody's drawing, or nobody within the political establishment draws the conclusions of these 20 years of negotiations. Alfred Einstein once defined insanity as repeating the same mistakes over and over and expecting different results. So, there are two ways to look at it. Either you think that all these people who have been trying to negotiate for 20 years are insane, and this is not my belief. Or you believe that, there may be something different at stake, and this might not be about peace, but about, securing other interests. And that's, it's probably a different ballgame here. As I said, the Palestinians have never been as divided, disorganized, and weak as they are today. And for any reason, they agreed to resuming these talks. So I think that, it's about time to question the whole peace process and see if maybe, there may not be other alternatives than the two-state
I'm getting
solution.
from both sides a tricky road ahead. Let me just bring in Jonathan Paris from London for his first comment. Jonathan, picking up from what Ziad Klo was saying, the people involved, are they insane or do they have something else to go at here?
Oh, I think there's quite a bit to go on. The best thing going for them is that the expectations are so low. The expectations were very low that Secretary of State Kerry would be able to achieve what he's done in the first 2 days of this week. And the expectations being low gives the parties a chance to surprise. And I think that's very important. The problem with the Camp David negotiations back in 2000 was the expectations were sky high, and Clinton was unable to deliver. The other thing is the Arab Spring was mentioned as a reason not to have negotiations. But in my view, what's been happening in the Arab Spring is a perfect opportunity for the Israelis and the Palestinians who have been least impacted by the Arab Spring and all the chaos in Egypt and Syria and Libya and Tunisia. They have a chance to work out this separate issue. Let me give you a specific example why I think the Palestinians find it a little easier to negotiate now. The Hamas group, which is against the negotiations in Gaza, have lost their patron in Mohammed Morsi of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. And the Egyptian army now is battling with Hamas and their collaborators, jihadists, in Sinai. So right now, Hamas is not in a position to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority to refrain from making any kind of talk or compromises with the Israelis. So I think it's a good opportunity. We'll talk more about the Israeli domestic situation, but I think this is a very good opportunity to see whether something can be generated in the course of talks. And I think the people on the two teams are excellent. Saeb Erekat, Tzipi Livni, Mohammed Shtaya is a pro, and as is Molko. So you've got a great team. And by the way, Martin Indyk has been working on the peace process for many, many years. I don't see him as an Israeli advocate by any means. Thank you.
Jonathan Paris, stay connected. We'll come back to you very, very shortly. So optimism from Jonathan Paris there. Ron, do you share that optimism?
No, I do not. But I think that it is important that the negotiations are handled properly. Up until now,
do you have faith in the team he's outlined
the mistakes that have been made is that every few years the parties were making interim agreements. And interim agreements do not work. Either you resolve the entire problem, or you don't. I was reading today that the Palestinians, for example, want to negotiate the borders first. That would be a very big mistake on the part of Israel if Israel agreed to it, because the only card that Israel is holding in this negotiation are the borders. Once it has made concessions on the borders, how is for example, the problem of the Palestinian refugees going to be resolved? Israel will have no cards. You cannot do it piecemeal. Either you resolve it, and I think that if Oslo, for example, in 1993, if Yasser Arafat had been offered in 1993 what he was offered in 2000 and refused, he probably would have accepted it. But this notion of resolving it piecemeal will never work.
As you were talking there, I noticed Siad Klo was frowning. I'm going to ask you why.
No, it's not.
You agree with what he said?
No, I don't, obviously.
Tell us more.
No, the big question mark here is, what leverage do the Palestinians have on the Israelis? I don't see any, frankly. I mean, to have leverage on, the Israeli government, you have to have, other alternatives, BATNA, as we call it, in case of failure of these negotiations, have other strategies to work on. The Palestinian Authority obviously are not working seriously on any other option. The problem here is that along the years, we've built an industry of the peace process and fundings, especially the fundings on which, the Palestinian Authority depends, can only be, given to the Palestinian Authority if they agree to negotiate by Israeli, American, and European standards.
Okay, I'm going to get you guys off the fence now. Ask you what you'd do with Jerusalem. What would you do with Jerusalem, chaps? How would you divide it? What would you do? Please don't wait for me to ask you. Jump straight in.
I don't think that the problem of Jerusalem is really solvable. I think that would probably cause the negotiations to end badly at the end of the day. And I think that the only solution...
Erekat's talking about everything being cleared up in 9 months.
The only solution that I can think of is a sort of long-term status quo, because I don't see a Palestinian or an Israeli signing off on giving up parts of Jerusalem.
Ron just mentioned something, that the Israelis only have the border card, but it's obviously the Jerusalem is another card, as is water issues. He mentioned the Palestinians already got what they wanted, but what they got from the EU or the UN is largely symbolic. Settlements, especially even in recent days, are even on the expand. There have been new resolutions to build thousands of new settlement units. So what the Palestinians have is largely symbolic. Israel has obviously the power. It can decide to give some leeway here and there, but Jerusalem, if it's important to be shared, I think it's less of an issue as compared to issues of borders, as issues of water, as issues of refugee.
We have a Twitter word from David Ludwig. What about Hamas? How can anything get done without them? That's one of the big issues, isn't it, Gilmore Halley? That, you know,
Yes.
which Palestinian group are you negotiating with? It is Fatah, it's not Hamas, isn't it? And Hamas doesn't want Israel to exist.
It's true that the Palestinian division is a major problem. And I don't think that a settlement could be, especially not a definitive settlement, could be achieved without a tacit agreement, at least from the Hamas. And this is only one of a very long list of problems. And I join the general view that, first of all, about your Jerusalem question, I don't think the problem today is to find a new creative idea.
But what would
This
your readers
era
say
is
about
over.
that?
Sorry?
What would the people who read your columns say about Jerusalem? They'd want to keep it as one whole city, wouldn't they, surely?
Yes, they would. They would like to keep Jerusalem under Israeli sovereignty, totally and undivided.
Yeah.
This is the official Israeli position, but we're not talking about that. We're trying to analyze what is possible. And when I said earlier that the profound changes brought about by the Arab Spring were not yet digested, what I mean is that the whole Middle East, the map of the Middle East will be redrawn. The fact that borders became sacred after 1945, in the world post 1945, lines drawn on the map by strange people in the 1890s and 1910s became the most sacred thing. And I understand that because it prevented chaos. Yeah. But now everything that happened in the Middle East, ever since 1917 and 1918, the cards are reshuffled. Iraq doesn't exist, Syria doesn't exist, Lebanon doesn't exist. There are questions about Jordan. We don't know what's the future of Egypt. Look what's happening in Libya, in Tunisia. And I will stop here before going to Sudan and Yemen. There's no Middle East anymore. We don't know. We'll have to print new atlases. And in the middle of that, what of the most important things that happened since 4 years ago, since the last negotiation, there were two things. First of all, the Palestinians were bitterly disappointed by Obama, and me too, by the way. I was certain that he will change the rules of the game, but he was outmaneuvered by the Israeli diplomacy, and Netanyahu was stronger than him. And the second thing is that it became clear that the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is not the most important thing, not only in the world, in the region.
There are other complications.
There are other complications.
Gil, we'll go on to that in the second half. Thank you, sir, for thank you for all your contributions thus far. We're taking a very short break, but stay with us. More to come here on France 24.